So after a nice Sunday afternoon nap at the Circuit Paul Ricard, it was only a week before F1 had its next race, this time heading to Budapest and Hungaroring for the 2022 Hungarian Grand Prix, a race now best known for Valtteri Bottas' career change to become a pro bowler.
Nice throw!
And then Lewis Hamilton taking the We Racers 1 campaign a bit too literally. Coming into the weekend, it was Max Verstappen with a 63-point lead ahead of Leclerc in the drivers' standings, with the gap being so big thanks to Leclerc parking his car in the barriers during the middle of the race. I guess it's better to ruin your own race before Ferrari do it for you. Meanwhile, a bit further back, Alpine had put themselves into 4th place in the Constructors, having overtaken McLaren in the standings. Well, I say McLaren, it's more like they've overtaken Lando Norris. Hey guys, it's Taran and welcome to the On Track channel and to round 13 in Hungary. Now, before we get going, a quick reminder to give the video a thumbs up if you enjoy, it always helps out with YouTube's algorithm, and don't forget to subscribe to keep up with all the weekly F1 content. Also, just as a heads up, I'm currently recovering from the virus that shall not be named, so if I sound a little off or anything, that may well be why. Now with that out of the way, let's get into my honest review of Formula 1 and the 2022 Hungarian Grand Prix. So to start off, there was big news for Red Bull, and when I say big news, I'm talking like Shaquille O'Neal size news, as it was announced that Porsche were planning a 10-year partnership based upon the change in engine regulations in 2026, with the German brand looking to acquire 50% of Red Bull's Formula 1 operations. My money is on that 50% being whichever half of the garage doesn't have Max Verstappen in. I imagine Christian and Helmut will want to keep that all to themselves. Over at Haas, and we got news that they would finally be bringing an upgrade to their 2022 car, but that upgrade would only be going on Kevin Magnussen's car and not on both, probably for fear of what might happen if they did give it to Mick. Meanwhile, over at Ferrari, team principal Mattia Binotto had given an interview saying how the goal for Hungary wasn't just to win, but for the team to get a 1-2. How about let's just start with getting both cars to the finish for a change? But at least winning was something they know they're capable of, which isn't currently the case at Mercedes, as Toto Wolff in his latest interview had said that the team just need to figure out how to win. I mean, bringing a half-decent car to the track seems like a good starting point. And finally, the biggest news of all was that fans were overjoyed to find out that Sebastian Vettel had finally joined Instagram, only to find out the reason was so he could announce his retirement and that 2022 would be his last season in Formula 1. But he'll head off as an absolute legend and an amazing person to boot, with 57 pole positions, 122 podiums and 53 race wins. I know those stats aren't final yet, but come on, he's currently driving an Aston Martin. Into FP1 now, and at the start of the session all eyes were on Aston Martin, and more specifically the team's new rear wing, as instead of stealing someone else's design, they'd actually been creative for a change, with their upgrade emulating the rear wings from the previous aero generations as they hoped it would gain them some lap time. And this new wing drew the eye of Fernando Alonso, who wanted to take a closer look at the back of Lance Stroll's car, with that look being so close that Fernando nearly ran into the back of him. Over at Haas, and we got a look at their upgrade, which was effectively to bring a white Ferrari to Hungary, as it seemed that if Aston Martin weren't copying teams, Haas had taken it upon themselves to fill the void. As previously mentioned, the upgrades were on Kevin Magnussen's car, but on the other side of the garage it looked like Mick could use the upgrades, as he took a wide line through turn 3, so wide he needed the runoff. Over at AlphaTauri, and it wasn't plain sailing for Tsunoda either, as he suffered a big lock up into turn 1. I guess at least he's trying to be quick, unlike the team themselves this year. But as the session went on, there wasn't too much of note, beside us finding out that the Monaco TV director was now in charge of Hungary as well, as we got Lance Stroll while waiting for Schumacher to get caught in some traffic in the shape of Carlos Sainz. And then a little later, Mick decided that if someone is going to get in his way, well then he'd just do the same with anyone else, and so in the final sector he did what the Red Bull team normally do and pretended that Sergio Perez just doesn't exist. Into FP2, and Ferrari were showing the early pace with their cars sitting first and second ahead of both Red Bulls, the Scuderia around most of the grid electing to start with the medium tyres. Over at Williams, they discovered a way to be quicker than other cars for once, and that was to use a set of softs. And that set didn't last too long for Alex Albon, as his were flat spotted at turn 1 thanks to the rear of his car giving up the will to live. Over at Mercedes, and George Russell was also having some trouble at the turn, with the Brit complaining that he couldn't get round the corner without the front wheels locking. Have you tried releasing the brakes, George? But come the end of the session, it was Charles Leclerc leading the way, with not Verstappen or Sainz behind, but Lando Norris, as the McLarens were looking to have a fairly decent car for a change. On to Saturday, and to say it was a bit wet would be a bigger understatement than saying Ferrari have a mountain to climb this season. Into the session though, and Leclerc was leading the way on the full wet tyres, Ferrari hoping he doesn't do his usual thing while leading. In the Mercedes garage, and car number 44 was stuck from going out as the team were looking for something under Lewis's car. Maybe if they look hard enough they'll find a time machine to take them back to when things were easy. But with the cars on track, they were struggling with turn 4, a number of drivers including Albon, Zhou, Magnussen and Gasly all heading off there. 20 minutes to go, and over at Alpine there was a moment for Alonso, as he needed all 3,000 years of F1 experience to save his car from spinning out at turn 3. But spinning out was something that Leclerc couldn't stop happening, as he practiced his ballet with a perfect pirouette and most importantly kept the car out of the barriers. George Russell also had troubles as he went deep at turn 12, his engineer letting him know of yellow flags only to be told by George that they were for him. But at least he did keep it out the wall, unlike Sebastian Vettel, who lost the rear at turn 10 and made his way into the barriers. Clearly having chosen to retire from F1, he retired himself from FP3 as well. But after that was cleared, there was just enough time for the final runs, and apparently after 2.5 years of using the world's biggest sandbags, Latifi had finally taken them off, as he finished the session top of the times ahead of Leclerc by a whole 0.6 of a second. I mean, he did get the final lap with the best track conditions, but we'll let him have his moment. Into qualifying, and it was dry again, but given it had rained in FP3, the track was clean and the evolution in qualifying would be huge. At the top we had the Red Bulls and the Ferraris as usual, along with the Mercedes pair 1-2 making use of the mentioned track evolution. Further back, after a repair job on his Aston Martin, Seb Vettel had made it out onto the track. Not for long, as he was knocked straight out of qualifying. Elsewhere, eyes were on Latifi, as after finishing FP3 and P1 we expected great things. I don't know why we expected great things, as he threw away a good lap with a bad final corner to be out in P20. Into Q2, and with a mix of some cars on used tyres and some on new after the first runs, we had some cars in strange places, such as Daniel Ricciardo sat in P4, probably wondering what this place was. But the main story of Q2 was Sergio Perez, as the Mexican ran wide in his first lap and had the time deleted, or so we thought as the stewards checked the footage and reinstated the lap time. But given Checo is performing as well as a sloth at a horse race, that time still only had him in 9th, which then became 11th when Bottas and Ocon jumped him at the end of the session, and joining Perez leaving qualifying at the second stage were both Haas cars with Stroll and Zhou. Into Q3, and after the first runs we had some strugglers, most noticeably Leclerc and Verstappen, with Leclerc down in P3 almost half a second off Sainz, but Verstappen down in 7th place, over 1.3 seconds away. And as it turned out, that Latifi-style first run for Max would be pretty crucial, as on the second run his car's power just up and left, which stranded the Dutchman down in P10. But up to the top, and with both Red Bulls out, we expected the Ferraris to be head and shoulders above the rest, and first across the line was Leclerc, but he couldn't beat his teammate and had to settle into second behind Sainz. Did I say second? Oh hello there, George. Well, that second for Leclerc became third as Russell only went and stuck his Mercedes into pole position, and given Ferrari's track record, that should make for an easy win come Sunday. On to lights out, and after a decent getaway, Russell held off Sainz round turn 1. Further back and making progress was Lewis Hamilton, as he made his way past both Alpines, and where he'd made up 2 places, as had both Red Bulls, Verstappen up to 8th and Perez into 9th. And they weren't done there, as after a quick VSC, because Albon and Stroll struggled with the concept of not colliding, Verstappen got past the Alpines, taking advantage of Alonso running a little wide and then sending one up the inside of Ocon into turn 1. Then up next was Hamilton, who was a bit stuck behind Norris, but down into turn 1 the Mercedes got through and Verstappen followed him past Lando as well. And if losing 2 places in one corner didn't make Lando fans sad enough, it was 3 in just over a lap as Perez made his way past as well, the McLaren moving further backwards than Vettel's hairline. Up towards the front and in behind Russell, things were spicing up, with Leclerc asking the pit wall if Sainz could pick up the pace. At this point I don't know what's more common, Ferrari messing up or Leclerc asking Sainz to be quicker. But in the lead, George wasn't waiting for anyone to catch him as Mercedes pulled the trigger on a pit stop and brought Russell in. However, they soon realised they weren't Red Bull and failed to have a clean stop, opening the door for Ferrari, who were eager to take advantage and box Sainz, only to have a slow stop themselves, meaning they could kiss their overcut goodbye. Further back, and we were all on the edges of our seats as Verstappen caught up to the back of Hamilton, only for Red Bull to pit Max and go for the undercut, subsequently denying us fans a battle and leaving us as disappointed as Lawrence Stroll probably is in his team. But the final pit at the front was for Leclerc, as he went for the overcut over his teammate, and it worked, partly because Leclerc was quicker, but also because Sainz was, well, kinda slow. So that's the leaders sorted, but further back it was some trial and error for the Alpines, as they stuck to their guns with a one stop onto hard tyres, with that particular compound proving to be about as good of a tyre as Roy Nissany as a racing driver, or the New York Jets are an NFL team, or even as good as Norwich and Fulham are at staying in the Premier League. Look, the hard tyres were completely useless and everyone knew it. Just remember that. But it wasn't the hard tyres that hampered Alpine in this moment. Instead, it was their drivers' inabilities to work as a team, as Alonso and Ocon squabbled between them, allowing Ricciardo to squeeze past them both. Not gonna lie, I'm surprised that at this point he still remembers what an overtake is. Back up at the front and on fresher tyres with a faster car, Leclerc had caught up to Russell, with Charles taking a couple of laps to feel George out. Maybe not the best phrase to use there. He took a couple of laps before making his way past the Mercedes and into the lead of the race. Surely he'd have the win under his belt from here. Fast forward a few laps, and after Yuki Tsunoda stopped spinning for no reason, it was time for more pit stops, with the first of those being Max Verstappen, as he once again undercut his way up the field, this time past Sainz and George Russell. And now we get to the point where if you're a Ferrari fan, I would suggest you go and find something to punch and throw across the room in order to vent your anger, as the circus, dressed in red, decided that from the lead, in order to cover off Verstappen, Leclerc needed to be pitted. For the hard tyres. Remember those things? The rubber that's more useless than the condom with holes in? Yeah, that's what they went for. And of course, that meant that Leclerc came out effectively driving on ice, allowing Verstappen to pass for the lead. But wait, it gets better. As with the hard tyres being so bad that even after Verstappen YOLO'd a 360 for shits and gigs and gave the lead back, he still couldn't compete, as Verstappen took the lead once again down at turn 1 and this time for good. Ferrari fans, I am sorry, there are no words. But back to the action, and in the midfield there was a short battle between Ricciardo and Stroll. I say short as it lasted about half a corner with Ricciardo locking up and taking out the Canadian. You know what they say, if you can't beat them, just lob your car up the inside and crash into them instead. Back to the front runners, and there were final stops to be made, these being for Sainz and Hamilton to change to soft tyres, as Leclerc should have. And talking of Leclerc, George had now caught him and then got past, with Ferrari putting Charles out of his misery and dropping him into even more misery by finally putting on the softs that they should have put on in the first place and relegating him into 6th place. Up ahead and on his soft tyres, it was progress being made for Lewis Hamilton, as he first caught and then passed Sainz, also on the soft tyres, before catching and passing George, with Toto so happy the two of them didn't Spain 2016 it. Throw in a retirement for Bottas because Alfa Romeos die more than me playing Call of Duty, and that just about wraps it up, with Verstappen taking the win, Hamilton in P2, Russell on the final step of the podium in P3, and Leclerc and Ferrari fans losing the last little bit of hope they didn't even know that they had. Anyways, that's all for now. Thank you very much for watching. If you have enjoyed, do make sure to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe for more F1 content, but until next time, take care.